The rain followed me in, clinging to the hem of my coat as I stepped into the hallway. Water trailed behind me, dotting the linoleum like small apologies I hadn't meant to bring. The air was too still, like it was holding its breath. I caught the sharp tang of lemon polish, same as always, but this time it cut through me. I stood there, letting the cold draft from the half-open door kiss the back of my neck. The place looked the same. Same framed needlepoint by the stairs, same shoe rack leaning slightly to the left. But it didn't feel like mine. Not anymore. "I made that casserole you used to love," I said, stepping into the kitchen. My voice was quiet, careful. I held the warm dish against my chest, like it might soften the mood. She didn't even glance at it. Her eyes swept past like I was just another takeout flyer. She moved a spoon on the counter, then wiped her hands on a towel. I kept holding the dish, not with pride, but because if I put it down, I didn't know what else I'd hold on to. The warmth seeped through the dish into my palms, grounding me, even as the room stayed cold. Then she said it. "You owe us for raising you." She didn't even turn around. Just said it, casual as anything, like she was commenting on the weather. I blinked. I didn't answer. The words floated up, hung there in the space between us like steam from the sweet potatoes. The ticking clock on the wall suddenly felt louder. The fridge hummed, the oven sat off and was forgotten. I could have dropped the dish. My fingers tightened around it instead. I felt my mouth twitch into a smile. Small, practiced, like the kind you use when someone hands you the wrong coffee and you pretend it's fine. Inside, I felt small, tucked in, folded. "I see," I said. My voice didn't shake, but my ribs did. And still, I stood there, holding effort wrapped in foil, and wondered when love became something measured and owed. The rain tapped gently against the window behind me. But no one moved. The quilt still smelled like lavender. I pulled it up to my chin, just like I used to when I was little, and let the warmth settle over me. The corners were a bit frayed now, the fabric soft from years of washing, but the stitching held strong, blue cornflowers stitched by hand, petal by petal. Mama had made it for me when I turned 8, said it would keep the cold out and the bad dreams too. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a memory waiting to breathe. Frost blurred the edges of the window panes, and outside, I could hear the walnut branches brushing the roof. I used to think they were whispering stories just for me. Back then, everything felt simpler. Mama would tuck me in with a kiss on the forehead and a soft hum of a lullaby she never finished. I didn't know all the words, but I knew the feeling, that I was safe, that I was loved. I remember once, I scraped my knee so bad I couldn't stop crying. She didn't scold me, just lifted me onto her lap and rocked me slowly. I can still feel her hand on the back of my head, smoothing my hair. That was before. Things changed. Before love came with conditions and quiet comparisons. Before I had to earn it. Lying there now, wrapped in that old quilt, I tried to find that old feeling. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of lavender still clinging to the threads. "I remember," I whispered, voice small in the hush, "when your love felt soft." And I felt the ache of it, how something so warm could turn cold without making a sound. The air always smelled like home back then. Cornbread just out of the oven, okra popping in hot oil, and a hint of my father's pipe smoke curling in slow spirals above the table. I'd sit on my knees in the wooden chair, watching Mama slice butter, the golden light from the overhead bulb turning everything honey-colored. "Don't touch, baby," she'd say gently as I reached for a piece too soon. "Wait for your Daddy." So I waited. I always did. There was laughter sometimes, mostly Daddy's. He had a warm chuckle that made you feel included, even if you didn't know the joke. But there were silences, too. Long stretches between bites where no one said anything. I used to think that was just how grown-ups talked, with their eyes more than their mouths. Even as a little girl, I felt it. That invisible thread that ran beneath the table like a tripwire. Mama's glance if I chewed too loud. Daddy's tightening jaw if a story ran too long. They never raised voices, but expectations hung like steam in the air. Be good, be quiet, be grateful. I'd watch the butter melt into the cornbread, listen to the soft scrape of a spoon against ceramic, and try to measure my worth in servings and smiles. The food was warm, the room was full. But I knew even then that some kinds of hunger weren't filled by dinner, and some silences spoke louder than grace ever could. I had found a little square of pink calico in Mama's biscuit tin, the one where she kept her sewing scraps. It had tiny white flowers on it, just the right size for my doll's new dress. I sat cross-legged in a patch of sunlight on the floor, the needle clumsy in my fingers, but my heart full of joy. "I'm making her a Sunday dress," I said proudly. When Mama walked in, thread trailing from my lap to the spool like a lifeline, she barely looked. "You're wasting good thread on that raggedy thing?" she said, already turning back to the sink. Her voice wasn't cruel, just clipped, like she was closing a door. I blinked. The needle paused mid-stitch. I just thought. I didn't finish. What was there to say? The room smelled like lemon soap and wood polish. The clock ticked louder after that. I wrapped the dress around the doll anyway, but it felt different now, like something that needed permission I didn't have. I kept sewing that day, though slower, quieter, like I was apologizing for wanting something just because it made me happy. That was the day I learned not all love is a yes, and sometimes even a needle and thread can prick more than fingers. James always smelled like cedar. He used to say it was from the fence he built with his father as a teenager, and it never quite left him. That scent wrapped around me the first time we slowly danced on the porch, bare feet brushing the creaky wood, cicadas humming somewhere beyond the fence line. His arms were solid, warm. He didn't say much at first, but when he did, his words felt chosen, like he meant everyone. "You look peaceful," he told me once, brushing a loose curl from my cheek. "Like the wind finally stopped chasing you." He wasn't wrong. With him, I could exhale. No scorecards, no measuring cups for affection. He didn't love me because I did something right. He loved me because I was there. We made a life out of hand-me-down furniture and second-hand dreams. He'd hum when he shaved in the mornings, read aloud the funny parts of the paper, and always left a kiss on my shoulder before falling asleep. I remember once, during a storm, the lights went out, and we just sat there. Him strumming the old guitar, me wrapped in one of his shirts. The rain tapped the window like a lullaby. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to earn my place. I was loved, simply and completely. And that changed everything. Mama never liked staying long. She'd come by with a casserole, a basket of muffins, something store-bought with the ribbon still on it. "You've made this place quaint," she said the first time she visited our new house. I smiled, unsure if it was a compliment or a comment. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She sat on the edge of the armchair like it might swallow her whole. I offered her coffee, and she wrinkled her nose at the brand. "You always liked the old blend better," she said. Every visit felt like a pop quiz I hadn't studied for. Were the curtains too sheer? Was my table too scratched? Did my laugh sound too much like joy? I kept trying. Cooked the right meals, wore the necklace she once gave me, set the table the way she used to. "Nice touch," she'd say, pointing at my table runner. A little busy, but sweet. Each word left a mark, soft enough to hide, sharp enough to bruise. I wanted her approval the way a baker watches for rise in the dough, kneading, waiting, hoping. But her praise always came with a pause, and I was always left filling the silence with questions. The lamp cast a soft glow across the kitchen table. I sat there alone, the heater murmuring in the background, a half-empty mug of tea cooling by my hand. I had started going through old photos, but closed the album after the third one. It wasn't the faces that got me. It was the expressions, forced smiles, tilted heads, the space between bodies that shouldn't have been there. I thought about Mama's casseroles and comments, about Daddy's long silences, about the thread I wasn't supposed to use and the cornbread I was meant to earn. Love had always felt conditional. I pressed my hand to my chest and tried to remember a time when it didn't. James had loved without keeping score. But even then, a voice inside me whispered, "Don't get too comfortable." I stared at the candle flickering near the window, its wax pooled like quiet sorrow. Did they cherish me or just invest in me? I still don't know. The wind tapped the pane, like it wanted to. I stayed seated, letting the silence settle around me, gentle and final. Some questions don't want answers. They just want to be heard. The kitchen was too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in around your ears, not because it's peaceful, but because something sharp had just been said. The steam from the sweet potatoes curled into the air like it was trying to escape. I stared at the dish, my hands, still wrapped around the sides. They were warm, but my chest felt cold. "You owe us." That's what she'd said, just 3 words. Calm, not cruel, just firm. As if she were stating a fact, like telling me what time it was. But those words, Lord, they stuck. They didn't echo. They clung to me like something wet I couldn't peel off. I looked at her, waiting for a smirk or a laugh, something to say it had come out wrong. She just walked to the fridge, like she hadn't just broken something open in me. I tried to speak. My mouth opened, but the words didn't come. My voice folded in on itself. The clock ticked on the wall, the same clock from my childhood, gold rim, hummingbird in the middle. It ticked through the silence like nothing had changed. I didn't. "No," I whispered, more to the casserole than to her. Her back didn't turn, and I just stood there, feeling like a balance sheet that hadn't balanced right. Years of visits, phone calls, holidays. Had I been paying dues all along? Not loving, just repaying. The steam from the sweet potatoes was fading fast, and for the first time in a long time, I couldn't breathe right in her house. The drizzle had picked up, just enough to smear the windshield in streaks, no matter how fast the wipers moved. I don't remember backing out of the driveway. I don't remember the stop signs or whether the light at Elms and 3rd was red or green. I was just driving. My hands gripped the wheel out of habit, not intention. The radio buzzed under the static, some gospel station barely coming through. A woman's voice rose above the fuzz, something about grace. I turned the volume up, then back down. I couldn't catch the words. Maybe I didn't want to. The car smelled like wet wool and lemon, my coat clinging to the scent of her hallway. My throat ached like I'd swallowed something heavy and sharp. "You owe us." That line repeated itself like a bad lyric, stuck in a song I never asked to hear. I glanced at my rearview mirror, half expecting to see her words following me down the road. But all I saw was mist and taillights. My chest hurt in a way that wasn't physical. It felt like I'd been evicted from something I didn't know I didn't own. Like love had always had a lock, and I'd finally found the key didn't fit me. The turn into my driveway came before I realized it. I sat there for a second with the engine humming, the rain whispering across the glass. Then I turned the key and sat in silence, wondering who that ride had belonged to, because it didn't feel like mine. I curled beneath the quilt that night, the same one I always reached for after a long day. It used to smell like lavender and old memories, like safety, but tonight it just smelled like fabric. The stitches that once told stories now just looked like thread. I ran my fingers across the edge and waited for something to stir. Nothing did. The lamp cast a soft circle on the nightstand. The rest of the room faded into dim corners, I could hear the rain tapping at the window like a neighbor too polite to knock hard. I didn't answer. Everything felt one step removed, like I was visiting a home that looked like mine but wasn't. I pressed my head into the pillow. The faint lavender scent was still there, tucked deep into the cotton. But it didn't bring me comfort tonight. It brought a weight, like she was here too, tucked into the folds of my blanket, whispering those words again. You owe us. Her voice had followed me home. Not loud, just present. Humming in the silence, folded into the corners, curled beneath the bed like dust you can't quite sweep out. I used to believe this house was mine, but tonight the walls didn't know me. Even the quilt felt like it had pulled away. I sat at the kitchen table, the light above me buzzing faintly. I hadn't turned on the overhead, just the little lamp near the sink. It made the room feel smaller, older, the kind of space where truth doesn't echo, it just sits beside you, quiet and sure. I pulled out a photo album, the red one with the broken spine, pages stuck together at the corners from some old spill. There we were, Easter, Christmas, recitals, smiles and ribbons and casserole dishes, and all I could see now were the transactions hiding behind each frame. I remembered birthdays that came with strings. Now don't forget to call Aunt June. Gifts with notes about price tags, advice. That felt more like correction than celebration. I sipped from a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Every kindness I replayed came with a receipt I hadn't noticed before. A ledger in her voice. A tally in her eyes. I thought I was a daughter, but now I wasn't sure I'd been anything more than a good return on investment. I shut the album and let it rest under my hand. The table was cool beneath my fingertips. So was the linoleum under my bare feet, and that ache in my chest wasn't sadness anymore. It was recognition. I was looking for a fresh pillowcase when I found the shoebox. Tucked behind the flannel sheets, between old towels and a lavender sachet that had lost its scent. The box was scuffed, the lid warped a little. I opened it and saw my father's handwriting. He wrote in a slant, always to the right, like his. Words were trying to reach you a little faster than his hand could keep up. Dozens of little cards, notes, and folded pages, some with oil smudges from his workbench. One caught my eye. Kindness is not currency. I read it again and again. My breath hitched. The box rested in my lap like it had waited for this moment. Daddy never said much at the table. Mama ran the house, the schedule, the expectations. But in his quiet ways, he'd always made space for me, slipping a peppermint in my hand at church or fixing a broken drawer before I even knew it was loose. Maybe he saw what I didn't. Maybe that slanted handwriting was his way of leaning toward me, saying what couldn't be said out loud. I sat there with those letters spread out like puzzle pieces, and for the first time that night, I didn't feel alone. The sky outside had turned the kind of pale pink that only happens just before dawn. I stood at the stove, the kettle warming slowly, but I hadn't lit the burner yet. My hands were empty, and they were steady. I sat at the table, fingers laced, palms resting against one another, not in prayer, not in pleading, just present. I thought about how Mama's words had stamped me like a bill unpaid, pressed into my chest and sealed with silence. But sitting there now, I realized something. I never asked for change. I gave love, freely, fiercely, without keeping count. And that was never a mistake. The smell of cinnamon drifted from the pantry. The floor creaked behind me. The wind had quieted. I leaned back in the chair, breathing in the quiet. Some debts are imagined, some love is real, and mine had always been real. The oven beeped softly, its warmth slipping into the room like memory. I pulled out the casserole, sweet potatoes bubbling gently beneath a layer of golden brown sugar, the nutmeg blooming warm in the air. I always used just a touch more thyme than the recipe called for. She used to like it that way. I set it on the counter and stared at it, steam rising in slow curls. Normally, I'd wrap it in a towel, carry it out to the car, drive it across town, present it like a peace offering. Something warm to prove I was still trying. But I didn't move. The afternoon light slipped through the blinds in soft, slanted lines across the counter. It lit the dish like it was waiting to be claimed. But I just stood there, hands on the edge of the counter, feeling the heat of the dish bleed into the stillness of the kitchen. I used to think love was something you brought warmth to someone else, I murmured. I reached for the towel, and then pulled my hand back. I didn't cry, I didn't sign. I just let the casserole sit there, cooling with each passing minute. Maybe that's what all this was. An offering no one asked for. A gesture expected, not cherished. The scent of sugar and thyme filled the space between what I wanted and what I'd never say out loud. I turned off the oven, left the dish, and walked away. The hallway creaked under my steps, a long, low groan that sounded more familiar than it should have. Like the floorboards had missed me, like they were asking where I'd been. I paused midway, fingers brushing, the wall out of instinct. The paint was cool. The air smelled like cedar and dust. I hadn't noticed the rug bunching up at the corner. It always did that, but today it felt like a reminder. Something small, calling me back to the parts of this house that I still remember. My steps slowed. Everything here held memories. The second board near the linen closet gave just a little under my heel. The dent in the wall from when James moved in that heavy bookcase too fast. Even the draft from under the door, somehow it felt less like a flaw and more like a sigh. I looked down the hallway, past the bedrooms, toward the kitchen light spilling faint gold into the dark. It used to feel like I filled this home. Like my presence lived in the corners, the creaks, the soft scuffs along the baseboards. But now, even my house felt like it was asking where my heart had gone, and I didn't have the words to answer. I was 8, maybe 9. Sunlight slanted across the floor of my bedroom, catching dust in the air like it was floating on purpose. I sat cross-legged with my biscuit tin of sewing scraps, sorting through bits of cloth like they were treasures. My doll needed a new dress. I chose the blue fabric with tiny daisies, found a button that looked like mother of pearl, though I knew it wasn't. I was halfway through stitching when Mama walked in. "Are you using my good thread?" she asked, not unkind, but not warm either. I nodded, smiling. "It's for Sarah's Sunday dress." She looked at the half-dressed doll in my lap, then at the needle in my hand. "Don't waste supplies on toys," she said, already turning, back toward the hallway. The door didn't slam, but it closed all the same. I sat there for a long minute, thread stretched between my fingers, not sure whether to keep going. The hum of cicadas outside felt louder than it should have. I finished the dress anyway, and I remember thinking, this isn't a waste. This is care. This is me trying. She didn't see that. Maybe she never would. But now, all these years later, I do. That thread wasn't wasted. It was the beginning of me loving out loud. I never kept track of the things I did. Not really. The extra groceries, the birthday cards, the middle-of-the-night phone calls when someone needed to talk or cry, the rides to the clinic, the casseroles that crossed town. I just did them, because that's what love looked like to me. You show up. You carry things. You hold hands without needing applause. But lately, I've started to wonder. Because when things turned cold, it was like none of it had ever happened. Like there was a tally somewhere I didn't know about, and I hadn't met the quota. I sat at the table last night with a stack of old notebooks, half-finished to-do lists, grocery scribbles, and a few bills. Nothing that meant anything. But I flipped through the pages anyway, trying to find proof that I mattered, that I gave more than I took. I never wrote it down. But maybe they did. In some invisible ink that only showed up when you were no longer useful. The lamp cast soft yellow, light on the table, warming nothing but paper. The clock ticked, and I sat there, realizing love shouldn't feel like a test you never studied for. But somehow, it always did. I didn't call, I didn't text, and I didn't bring a casserole. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted her to miss me, but because I was tired. The rain whispered across the window, barely loud enough to notice. My chamomile tea sat untouched beside the lamp, growing cold. This wasn't bitterness, it was breathtaking. An exhale I'd been holding for too many years. I used to think that if I just tried harder, smiled more, gave more, offered love like it was pie at a potluck, maybe she'd finally see me. Maybe she'd offer love back, but she never did. Not really. She measured affection in effort, in usefulness, and I was done auditioning. I wrapped the shawl tighter around my shoulders, leaned back in the chair, and let the silence do what I never could, say no. Not out of cruelty, but because I finally understood. I'm not punishing her. I'm just done. The ceiling was the same off-white it had always been, but in the early morning blue, it looked almost soft. I lay there with my hands folded across my stomach, blanket pulled up, just under my ribs. The birds had just started their slow chatter outside, one at a time, as if checking to see if it was safe to speak. I didn't cry, but I also didn't blink. My heart felt like it was balancing something heavy and quiet. And I asked myself the question I'd never said aloud before. Was I ever really her daughter, or just something she put effort into, expecting a return? It hurt to ask. It hurt more not to. Because if love was always tied to how much I gave, how well I behaved, how little I asked, then maybe I was never the point, just the product. The air felt colder somehow. The blanket didn't help. I stared at the ceiling and waited for an answer that wouldn't come, and in that stillness, I felt something shift, not loud, not sharp. Just a quiet cracking inside the part of me that still hoped, no tears, just the truth, and the blue light of a new day creeped across the wall. The drip started soft. At first, I thought it was just the clock ticking louder in the quiet, but then it came again, steady, deliberate. I glanced up, and sure enough, a tiny dark spot had bloomed on the ceiling just above the old armchair. Another droplet fell. Then another. I fetched a pot from the kitchen. It clanged hollow as I set it down beneath the leak, the sound echoing, off the walls like the room had something to say but didn't know how. It didn't stop. Another drip, this time by the front door. Then one near the bookshelf. I moved from spot to spot with arms full of metal and plastic, pots, bowls, even an old roasting pan. The house I had kept stitched together for decades was unraveling all at once. The soft yellow lamp beside the sofa flickered once, then held. The storm outside had turned cruel, slamming against the windows like it wanted to. I stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by shallow pools and echoing drips, and felt still, not scared, not angry, just tired. I placed the last pot and wiped my damp hands on the back of my pants. The house smelled of wet plaster, soaked wood, and something older, like resignation. For years, I held this place up like a second skin. Every squeak, every sagging corner, I patched and tucked. But tonight, the leaks came through. And for the first time, the house wasn't the only thing tired of holding everything together. The chair felt colder than usual, like it had absorbed the weight of the storm. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, but the chill found its way through anyhow. My knees ached, my hands were stiff. The ache wasn't just in my bones, it was in the space behind my ribs, in the place that once carried hope like a warm ember. I didn't move. Not even when the wind rattled the window beside me. The buckets in the living room filled one drop at a time. I could hear them from here, ping, plunk, splash, like a cruel kind of lullaby. I used to patch every leak myself. Climb ladders I had no business climbing. Scrub water stains until my knuckles turn raw. There wasn't a crack I didn't cover, a drip I didn't challenge. But tonight, I just let it fall. I didn't go check on the attic, didn't grab a flashlight or fumble for duct tape. I sat still, let the house leak and creak and breathe around me. The blanket smelled like damp wool and cedar, a scent I once associated with winter nights and cinnamon tea. But now it just reminded me of time, how it passes even when you don't move. My tea's gone cold. The rain didn't stop, and I didn't rise. I was 12 the first time the ceiling leaked. I'd been sick, feverish, my breath shallow like I was learning how to breathe all over again. I remember lying on the living room floor, curled under a patchy quilt, when Mama came in holding a mop. She nudged my shoulder with the wooden handle. "Up," she said, like it was any other day. "Tiles flooded. Use the towels first." My head throbbed. I coughed so hard my whole body shook. But I started. "No buts. You're not dying." That's what she always said when I got sick. "You're not dying, so get up." I did. I wobbled to my feet, leaned the mop against the fridge, and started soaking up water with my knees and elbows on that freezing tile floor. The bleach stung my nose. The towels were damp and smells like mildew. Every breath felt like a rock in my chest. But I didn't cry, because I thought maybe, if I cleaned it well enough, she'd say thank you, or tuck me back in, or sit beside me and place a hand on my forehead the way I'd seen on TV. She never did. That night, I learned rest was something you earned. And even then, it might not come. The house was quiet now, but I still remembered the sound of my mop swiping across the floor and the soft coughs that no one tended to. Even now, I wondered if she ever heard them. The drip turned into a splatter. I looked up, and the stain on the ceiling had stretched, glistening like an open wound. The lamp flickered again, and then went out with a soft pop, throwing the room into dimness. A gust of wind slammed into the house, and for a second, it felt like the walls might give out too. I stood still in the dark, water trickling down from above, and I stared at my hands. They used to be strong. They used to fix things. They'd held babies, smoothed out sheets, wrapped gifts with crisp edges. Now they looked like paper, worn, faded, capable, but tired. I felt the tears before I knew I was crying, not because of the leak, not because of the cold, but because the storm finally said what no one ever did out loud. I was never really loved for who I was. Just what I could hold up. I cried for every birthday I cooked through, every illness I walked off, every moment I held things together while quietly falling apart. The water hit the rug with a slap, and I let it fall. Because tonight, the ceiling wasn't the only thing that caved. Lightning flashed outside, casting the room in brief silver light. I sat near the window, the blanket clutched around me like armor. I watched the branches dance wildly against the wind, like they were trying to break free from something too. My voice cracked when I spoke, though there was no one there to hear. "What was it all for?" I whispered, "if I was never held when I needed holding?" The thunder rolled in response, low and slow. Love never asked me to rest. It asked me to endure, to give, to carry, to quiet myself so others could speak louder. And I did. I wore that strength like a badge for years. But now I couldn't tell if it had been love at all, or just a list of expectations with a bow on top. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass. The storm outside didn't frighten me. It understood me, because I'd spent my life weathering storms that didn't come with warnings, and I was tired of pretending they hadn't soaked through. The sky was just beginning to shift, the faintest blue blooming at the edges of black. The four. Water hadn't stopped. It wasn't fierce now, just steady, like it had made up its mind. The rug was soaked through, heavy and sour with mildew. The pots were nearly full, but I didn't rise to empty them. I sat on the floor, legs crossed, hands resting in my lap, and I just let it all be. I'd spent a lifetime holding back the flood, and tonight I finally let go of the mop. I didn't wipe the counters. I didn't adjust the couch cushions. I didn't worry about the damage. I just breathed. Sat in the stillness. Let the storm inside me match the one outside. Tonight, I gave myself permission to not be the strong one. And the water, it didn't ask for anything in return. The morning light was soft, still warming its way through the trees. I stepped out to get the paper, barely awake, slippers nearly sliding off my feet, and there it was. A small envelope tucked just beneath the edge of the newsprint. No stamp, no return address. Just my name written in looping letters that looked almost too careful to be real. I stood still for a second, listening. Nothing but the soft chirp of birds and the quiet hum of the breeze. The envelope felt weightless in my hand, like it might float away if I didn't hold it close. I turned it over a few times before opening it. Slowly. The flap peeled back like it had been sealed with intention, not habit. I unfolded the letter, as gently as I could, like it might crumble if I rushed. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't a note asking for something. It was just there, for me. And in that moment, standing barefoot on damp porch boards, the scent of cut grass curling up from the lawn, I realized it was the first time in years that something had arrived without expectation. No debt, no strings, just a letter, and I wasn't sure whether to cry or keep reading. I brought the letter to the kitchen and sat with it in the light that streamed across the table. My tea was still hot, steam rising in soft spirals, forgotten beside me. The paper was thick, slightly wrinkled at the edges. Written in crayon, purple crayon, "I feel safe in this," it read. "Thank you for the blanket. The purple square feels like a hug." There was a little heart drawn at the bottom, lopsided but earnest. I stared at the words until they blurred. Not from tears, though they threatened, but because something inside me had stirred, something old and good. I could see the blanket in my mind, one of the dozens I'd stitched over the years, squares of fabric sewn with aching fingers, and hope that someone would feel it. I hadn't remembered who it was for. I never kept track. But this child remembered. At that moment, I remembered why I ever stitched at all. Not for praise, not for points, just to offer warmth, the only way I knew how. And somehow, that warmth had found its way back to me. I hadn't noticed it until the mug touched my lips. A slow sip, then another, and suddenly I realized I was smiling. It wasn't big. It didn't pull at the corners of my face like it used to. But it was there. Honest, unforced. A quiet bloom rising through the cold soil I didn't know was still inside me. I let the mug rest in my hands. The warmth of it didn't just sit in my palms. It moved through me, soft and easy. Outside, the wind chimes tinkled, the sound gentle, almost bashful. A breeze moved through the open window, carrying in the smell of honeysuckle and the faint hint of someone's laundry being done nearby, fabric softener and Sunday soap. I leaned back in my chair and let the sunlight stretch across my face. Weeks had passed like shadows, slow, silent, and heavy. And suddenly, there was light. Not enough to change everything, but enough to remember what it felt like, enough to start again, even if it was just with a smile. I stepped out into the backyard barefoot. The grass was warm and wet beneath my soles, soft like memory. I hadn't walked this way in months, maybe more. Always slippers, always a reason to stay inside. But today I didn't think so. I just stepped. The wind lifted my nightgown at the hem, brushed against my ankles like a whispered hello. The scent of honeysuckle and damp earth wove together, thick with morning air. A dog barked a few yards over, and birds traded notes in the maple tree near. The fence line. I closed my eyes, breathed deep. The world hadn't changed. The house still leaked. The aches still sat heavy in my knees, but I had shifted. Something inside me had unclenched. I used to belong to lists, to expectations, to duties that never ended. But just for now, just for this one moment, I belonged to nothing, and it felt like enough. I sat on the back step, the letter folded in my hand, not tight, not crumpled, just held, like something worth keeping. The sun had crept higher now, spilling through the trees in golden strips. The porch smelled like old wood and warm earth. Everything was quiet, but not lonely, just still. I looked down at the envelope one last time, that purple crayon heart. Those simple words. She had no idea what she gave me. It wasn't just thanks, it was proof. That kindness matters, that softness can land, that maybe, just maybe, not everything has to be tallied or weighed or earned. Some things just are. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and for once, I didn't need an answer or an apology or a return address, because what she gave me was more than thanks. She gave me back a part of myself I thought had slipped through the cracks, and that was everything. The pen rested softly between my fingers, blue, smooth, uncapped. I sat across the lawyer, a gentle man with a quiet tie and a kinder smile. The office smelled like fresh coffee and old ink, with sunlight slipping through the blinds, striping the floor in light and shadow. He slid the paper forward, one sheet at a time. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded. I didn't fidget. I didn't ask for another moment. My hand moved without hesitation, signing each line like it already knew this was what closure felt like. The strokes were clean, no shake in my wrist, no doubt in my gut. When I finished the last page, I let the pen fall gently onto the table. "It's done," I said, more to myself than to him. A strange warmth settled in my chest, not the kind that makes your heart race, but the kind that steadies your breathing. For the first time, I wasn't giving out of guilt. I wasn't tethered by obligation or aching silence. I was choosing, and there was something sacred in that. I smiled faintly, gathering my purse, the papers now sealed and waiting. He held the door open for me as I left, but I didn't rush. The sidewalk outside felt different, not new, just lighter. Like I had quietly rearranged the weight of my life and found that I could still carry it. I didn't owe anyone this piece, but I gave it anyway, because I finally had enough left over for myself. I opened the hope chest that afternoon, the one with the brass hinges and the little scratch on the lid from where James dropped the screwdriver once. Inside, the quilts were folded neat, row after row of colors and memories. Each square told a story, a pattern stitched during snowstorms, another sewn while waiting for news or grieving something unnamed. Soft blues, yellows, a patchwork of who I used to be. I picked up the one with the lilac binding. I'd made it when my hands still ached from arthritis flares, stitching through the pain just to keep the rhythm. I used to imagine someone in the family wrapping themselves in it someday, but today I set it aside, not for family, for the women's shelter across town. One by one, I stacked the quilts into the large cloth bag. Lavender and cedar still clung to the fabric, a scent of old comfort and patient care. These pieces of me, they didn't belong in closets. They belonged on shoulders, around children's feet, beneath someone finally sleeping safely. If my hands ever told a story, let it be this: softness is strength, and it belongs to those who meet it with gentleness, not demands. The breeze lifted the curtain beside me, sunlight spilling across the room like a quiet blessing, and for the first time, I let my legacy lie not in blood, but in kindness. She was waiting on the porch before I even pulled into the drive. That young nurse, Camilla, brown ponytail, quiet eyes, always gentle when she spoke. "Hi," she said, almost like a question. "Hi," I smiled. The house looked warm in the afternoon sun, the hydrangeas blooming near the steps in all their soft, forgiving blue. I held the key tight between my fingers as I climbed the stairs, feeling the little grooves press into my palm one last time. "I wanted to give this to you in person," I said. She blinked. "You mean?" I nodded. "The deed's been transferred. It's yours now." Her hand trembled as she took the key. "You... why?" "Because you treated me like a person," I said. "Not a job, not a burden." She didn't speak, just stood there with the key in one hand and her other pressed softly against her chest. I reached into my coat and pulled out the tiny folded paper. "There's a list of things that creak, and the basement light switch is stubborn. You'll figure it out." "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything." And I meant it. The porch creaked behind me as I stepped away, the air filled with the scent of late blossoms. I'd left the house to someone with no claim, no title, just kindness, and that, for once, felt like the right measure. The room smelled the same, lemon cleaner and something faded, like old roses past their bloom. She sat in her chair, back straight, hands folded in her lap like always. "Mother," I said, closing the door gently behind me. She looked up, face neutral. I sat across from her. No tray of cookies this time, no plastic smile. "I didn't come to argue," I said, "or to ask for anything." She didn't nod, didn't speak. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. "I revised my will." She glanced at it but said nothing. I left the house to someone who checked on me without needing to. The quilts are going to shelters. And everything else, it's being given without expectation. Her brow lifted slightly. "You raised me, yes," I said. "But I mothered myself." The silence held. "You always gave out of duty. I'm choosing to give out of love." For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Grief, maybe. Regret. But it passed. She didn't argue. She didn't apologize. She just looked down at her folded hands, and the silence between us did all the talking. I stood to leave. No hug. No goodbye, just a door that closed softly behind me, and the sound of a chapter turning. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes, each step steady but slow. The wind moved through the tall grass on either side of the driveway like it knew what I'd just done, what I hadn't said, what I'd finally let rest. There was no applause, no parade. No one rushed after me to say, "You were right." And maybe, years ago, that would have broken me. But now it felt like air. Pure. Quiet. My own. I didn't need to be the daughter who fixed everything. I didn't need to be forgiven for drawing a boundary. I just needed to walk away without leaving myself behind. The sky was softening into dusk, the last light pooling along the horizon like it was holding on, just a little longer. I reached the car and looked back once, just once. Not in mourning, but in recognition that I'd survived. Something most never named, and I was free. The journal was old, linen-bound with frayed corners, but still mine. I pulled it from the shelf, sat down on the edge of the bed, and opened it to the first page. The lamp beside me hummed faintly, casting a gentle circle of light across the paper. I picked up my pen and wrote my name. Slow, steady, each letter blooming. Across the page like something that mattered. I wasn't writing it for anyone else. Not for documents, not for proof. Just for me, because they had rewritten me too many times, reduced me to roles, obligations, inheritances. But this was mine. I traced the final curve of my name with my finger. Softly, I had given what I needed to give. And what I kept without apology. The wind brushed the curtain gently, whispering through the window like it was saying something kind, and I whispered back, "They don't get to rewrite me. That's mine to do." The sewing room was warm, tucked in soft shadows and thread. The machine hummed quietly beneath my fingers, the needle slipping in and out of the fabric with the steadiness of breath. A breeze drifted through the open window. Carrying the faint scent of lavender oil, I dabbed on the wrists of my old pincushion. The fabric beneath my hands was worn but clean, bright in places, faded in others, pieces of old curtains, shirts, baby blankets. I wasn't sewing for birthdays anymore, not for holidays, not for anyone who would measure the gift by the weight of their expectations. These quilts were going to shelters. No tags, no names, just warmth. Each square felt like a prayer, not a repayment. A small patch of something kind, something needed. A softness in a world that so often demands sharp edges. I ran my fingers along the stitched seams, smiling to myself. "No one will know my name on these," I whispered. And I think that's the most beautiful part. I sewed late into the night, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The needle never judged the hour, the fabric never kept score, just me and the hum and the breeze, and a quiet peace that asked for nothing in return.